Fear and despair gripped Anya's heart as she looked at the frail kitten, its tiny body trembling. What if all her efforts, all the time spent cleaning its wounds, feeding it, comforting it, weren't enough? What if the kitten didn't survive? The thought was almost unbearable. She had poured her heart into saving it, had stayed up late, had pushed through every difficult moment, hoping each day would bring improvement. But now, the kitten seemed weaker, its breath shallow, its body limp. The weight of uncertainty pressed on her chest, and tears stung her eyes. She tried to steady her shaking hands as she gently stroked the kitten's fur, whispering softly, but deep down, she was afraid. Afraid that despite everything, despite all the love and care, it might not be enough. Chapter 1. The Encounter with the Kitten. It was a quiet, sunny afternoon when Anya decided to take a walk in the park. The trees were in full bloom, casting long, dappled shadows on the grass. She loved the park. It was a peaceful place, full of green spaces where she could think, daydream, and escape from the noise of the world. With her backpack slung over one shoulder, she wandered along the path, admiring the beauty of the flowers and the distant sounds of children laughing and playing. Anya was 10 years old, with bright eyes and a curious nature. She had always loved animals, often spending hours reading books about wildlife or playing with the stray cats in her neighborhood. That afternoon, however, something was different. There was an unease in the air, a feeling that something was about to change. As she strolled near the edge of the park, a soft rustling sound caught her attention. She stopped and looked around, trying to locate the source of the noise. It didn't take long to spot them. 3 stray dogs, scruffy and disheveled, huddled near the bushes. Their eyes were wild, scanning the area for food or trouble. Anya instinctively took a step back, her heart beginning to race. She had seen these dogs before, lurking around the park, but they had never seemed so close or so threatening. Suddenly, there was a sharp yelp, followed by frantic scratching noises. Anya froze, her breath catching in her throat. From behind the bushes, a small, frightened kitten darted out, its fur matted and eyes wide with terror. The dogs, sensing an opportunity, began to growl and charge, their jaws snapping dangerously close to the kitten. The little creature's tiny legs moved as fast as they could, but it was clear the dogs were faster, stronger, and determined to catch it. Without thinking, Anya sprang into action. She ran toward the scene, her feet pounding against the path as her mind raced. The dogs were almost upon the kitten now, their vicious barks echoing through the air. Anya's heart pounded in her chest as she shouted, "Go away! Leave it alone!" The dogs paused for a moment, startled by her voice, but they were not easily intimidated. They turned their attention back to the kitten, who was now cornered against a tree. Desperation filled Anya's veins. She was terrified, but she couldn't just stand there and do nothing. The thought of that helpless little creature getting hurt made her blood boil with fear and anger. In a split second, Anya grabbed a stick from the ground and waved it in front of the dogs. "Shoo! Get away!" she yelled, her voice trembling but fierce. The dogs hesitated, growling low, but they didn't retreat. Then, something unexpected happened. The kitten, terrified and exhausted, leaped toward Anya. It made a frantic dash, its tiny paws skimming the ground as it hurled itself into her arms. Anya instinctively caught it, cradling the trembling animal against her chest. The dogs, sensing defeat, barked one last time and trotted off into the distance. Anya stood there, her heart racing, as she held the kitten close. It was shaking violently in her arms, its fur matted with dirt and blood. One of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and there was a deep gash on its side, likely from the dog's teeth. Anya's hands were trembling as she gently stroked its fur, trying to calm both herself and the frightened little creature. "What do I do now?" Anya thought, her mind reeling with a mix of fear and concern. She couldn't just leave the kitten here, not after what had happened. But what if it was too injured to survive? What if it couldn't be saved? A flood of emotions washed over her. She felt helpless, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't just walk away. She had to try. She had to save it. The kitten whimpered softly in her arms, and Anya's determination grew stronger. I'm not going to let you die, she whispered to it. I'll help you, I promise. With that, Anya began walking back down the path, carefully cradling the kitten against her chest. Every step felt like an eternity as she made her way home, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The streets seemed quieter than usual, as if the world had slowed down to give her time to think. Her thoughts raced, a whirlwind of questions and worries. How would she explain this to her parents? Would they let her keep the kitten? What would she do if it needed medical attention? The thought of taking it to a vet was terrifying, but she knew it was the only chance the kitten had. As Anya reached her front door, she hesitated. She had always been the responsible one, but this was different. This wasn't a pet she had picked out from the shelter, or a cat that had wandered into her yard. This was an injured, scared animal, and it was counting on her to make the right decisions. Anya swallowed hard, steeling herself for what was to come. She knew her parents might be upset. They had always been cautious about letting her keep animals, especially ones that weren't healthy or well cared for. But she had no choice now. She pushed open the door slowly, careful not to startle the kitten, and stepped inside. The familiar warmth of the house greeted her, but the tension in the air was palpable. She could already hear her mother's voice from the kitchen, and she knew that any minute now, her parents would ask about her walk. "Mom. Dad," she called softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I need help with something." Her mother appeared in the hallway, a concerned look crossing her face when she saw Anya standing there, cradling the kitten in her arms. The kitten mewed weakly, and Anya's heart sank. She had to act fast. "What happened?" her mother asked, her voice a mix of worry and surprise. Anya took a deep breath and explained everything. The dogs, the kitten's injuries, and how she had saved it. Her mother listened silently, her brow furrowed as she took in the situation. When Anya finished, her mother sighed, her gaze softening. "Let's get it cleaned up first," she said quietly. "We'll see what we can do." Anya nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't over yet, there was still so much to be done. But for the first time, she felt like she might just have a chance to save the little kitten. Chapter 2. Parents are against it. Anya paced back and forth in the hallway, the kitten safely tucked into her arms. Her heart was still racing from the earlier events, but she knew the hardest part was yet to come. She had saved the kitten, but now she had to convince her parents that it was worth helping. She took a deep breath and knocked lightly on the kitchen door. Her mother, who had been preparing dinner, looked up with a warm smile, but that smile faded as soon as she saw the serious expression on Anya's face. She looked down at the small bundle in her daughter's arms and raised an eyebrow. "Anya, what's going on?" her mother asked, concern evident in her voice. Anya hesitated for a moment before stepping into the kitchen, holding out the kitten carefully. "Mom, Dad, I found this kitten today. It was being attacked by some stray dogs in the park. I couldn't just leave it there, so I brought it home." Her mother's eyes widened, and she quickly reached out to take a closer look at the tiny, trembling creature. "Oh no. What happened to it?" "It's hurt," Anya replied, her voice trembling. "Its leg is broken, and it has a wound on its side. I'm really scared it might not survive, but I think it's worth a shot." Her father, who had been sitting at the table reading the newspaper, glanced up at them. The concern in his eyes quickly turned to dismay. "Anya, what were you thinking?" he asked sharply, pushing his chair back. "This is dangerous. You don't know what kind of diseases those stray dogs might have. And you don't know anything about treating injuries like that." Anya felt her stomach twist. She had expected her parents to be worried, but she hadn't anticipated the full force of their concern. Her father was always so practical, and it seemed like he was about to say something that would crush her hopes of helping the kitten. "Dad, I promise I'll be careful. I can clean its wounds, and I'll make sure it doesn't come into contact with anyone else. Please, I just want to help it," Anya pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, softening a little. "I understand you want to help, Anya, but you're not a veterinarian. You could get hurt too, and we're not sure what kind of medical care it needs. What if it's really sick?" I know it's risky, Anya replied, her voice steady despite her nervousness. But I can't just ignore it. It's scared and hurt, and I think it deserves a chance. I'll do everything I can to take care of it. Her father stood up, pacing across the room, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. We'll have to take it to the vet. But even then, we don't know what they'll say. This might be more trouble than it's worth. Anya felt a lump form in her throat. She understood their concerns, but she couldn't let the kitten suffer just because they were afraid of the potential risks. She had made a promise to herself and to the little creature. She wouldn't give up so easily. After what felt like an eternity of silence, her mother sighed. All right. We'll take it to the vet, but I want you to promise me that you'll be cautious. This is not something we can just ignore. It's going to take a lot of effort, and you have to be sure you can handle it. Anya nodded eagerly, feeling the relief flood through her. I will. I promise, Mom. Her father crossed his arms. And the kitten has to stay in a separate room until we're sure it's healthy and clean. We can't have it around the other animals until we know it's safe. Anya agreed, her heart swelling with gratitude. It wasn't the ideal situation, but it was enough. Thank you. I'll make sure it's in a safe place. With a sense of determination, Anya set about creating a safe space for the kitten. Her parents had given her a chance, but it came with conditions, and she understood why. She wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. She carried the kitten to the small room at the back of the house, a cozy and used space that had once been a storage area. The room was perfect for her new task. She laid down an old blanket on the floor, then a few soft towels to create a comfortable bed. She made sure the temperature was warm enough for the kitten, who had begun to shiver again as soon as she set it down. As Anya worked, she kept talking to the kitten softly, reassuring it with gentle words. You're safe now. Don't worry, I'm here, she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure the kitten could understand. Still, it seemed to respond to her voice, its little ears flicking in her direction. Once the makeshift bed was ready, Anya took a moment to inspect the kitten's injuries again. The gash on its side still looked raw and painful, and its leg was bent awkwardly, clearly broken. Anya knew she would need to clean the wound properly, but she wasn't sure how to treat the broken leg. It was hard to look at, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for not knowing what to do. She took a deep breath and stepped back, trying to steady herself. This wasn't going to be easy, and there were so many unknowns. Would the kitten survive the night? Would it be able to heal properly with just her care? She had no answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to give up. As the evening settled in, Anya made sure the room was quiet and peaceful for the kitten. She left a small bowl of water near its bed and a dish of food she had warmed up, hoping it might be able to eat something. The kitten lay still, exhausted from the day's events, but its eyes fluttered open every now and then, looking up at her with a mix of fear and curiosity. Anya sat by its side for a long while, just watching it. She knew there was a long road ahead, filled with challenges, but for the first time, she felt a sense of purpose. She had made the decision to save this little creature, and she would see it through, no matter what it took. But as she sat there, a new worry began to creep into her mind. Would it be enough? Was the safe room, the food, the water, the warmth, would it be enough to help the kitten recover? Anya didn't know, but she was determined to try. The kitten had a chance now, and that was all that mattered. Chapter 3. The First Care. Anya woke up early the next morning, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The night had passed slowly, filled with thoughts about the kitten and whether it was all right. She had checked on it several times during the night, each time finding it curled up in a tight ball, still and quiet. She hadn't seen it move much, and that worried her. Was it too weak to even try to get up? She quickly washed her face and rushed downstairs, eager to begin her day of caring for the tiny creature. When she entered the small room, the sight of the kitten still lying on the makeshift bed made her breathe a sigh of relief. It hadn't wandered off or gotten worse overnight. But she knew that things were far from easy. Today was going to be a critical day for its recovery. Anya kneeled beside the kitten, gently stroking its fur. The poor thing's body was stiff, and it looked at her with wide, cautious eyes. It still seemed scared, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "Good morning, little one," she whispered softly. "I'm here to help you." The first task of the day was cleaning the kitten's wounds. Anya had never treated an injury like this before, and she wasn't entirely sure where to begin. She had watched a few videos online the night before, learning what she could about how to clean cuts and scrapes, but now that she was face to face with the task, she felt overwhelmed. The kitten mewed weakly as she carefully picked it up. She tried to soothe it by speaking in a calm, gentle voice, but it tensed in her hands. She had to act quickly though, or the wound might get infected. Anya retrieved a clean cloth, some warm water, and a small bottle of antiseptic she had found in the first aid kit. Her hands trembled slightly as she dipped the cloth into the water and began to gently wipe the dirt and debris from the kitten's side. The little creature winced at first, but didn't try to escape. Anya kept her movements slow and careful, her voice a constant murmur of reassurance. The gash on the kitten's side was deep, and Anya felt her stomach churn at the sight of it. It was a reminder of just how lucky the kitten was to be alive. After a few moments, she gently dabbed the antiseptic on the wound, wincing as the kitten let out a soft cry. Anya's heart broke at the sound, but she knew she was doing the right thing. There, it's almost done," Anya whispered, trying to comfort the kitten. "Just a little more." The kitten didn't protest anymore, perhaps too weak to do so. When she finished cleaning the wound, she carefully wrapped it in a bandage, making sure it wasn't too tight but still secure enough to protect the injury. Her hands felt clammy as she set the kitten back down on its blanket. It was clear the wound was serious, but at least it was clean now. She hoped the rest of the healing process would go smoothly. Next came the feeding. Anya had already researched what she could give the kitten, but there was still a lot of uncertainties. She had bought some special kitten milk replacement formula from the pet store the night before, hoping it would help nourish the little one. She carefully opened the can, noting the soft smell of the milk as she poured a small amount into a shallow dish. She set it down in front of the kitten, her heart full of hope. The kitten's eyes flickered towards the bowl, but it didn't make any attempt to drink. "Come on, little one," Anya coaxed, her voice gentle. "It's good for you. It'll help you feel better." The kitten sniffed at the milk but didn't seem interested. Anya tried not to let her disappointment show. It was so important for the kitten to eat, especially now that it had sustained such injuries. But it wouldn't drink. Her mind raced. What if it refused to eat altogether? What if it wasn't strong enough to recover without proper nourishment? She tried again, gently nudging the kitten closer to the dish. "Please, just try," she whispered, her hand softly petting its fur to comfort it. The kitten looked up at her, eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion, but still, it didn't drink. After a moment of uncertainty, Anya decided to try a different approach. She gently picked up the kitten and held it near the dish, letting its nose touch the milk. Still, it hesitated. Frustration began to bubble inside her, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. The kitten wasn't used to humans yet, and perhaps it was too frightened to eat from a dish. She carefully brought the kitten to her lap and held the dish in one hand, guiding the kitten's mouth gently to the edge. This time, the kitten sniffed again, and to her relief, it licked at the milk. Anya smiled softly, her heart swelling with happiness. The kitten was drinking, albeit slowly, but it was a start. She sat there patiently, feeding it little by little until it seemed content for the moment. But the task wasn't over yet. Anya still had to get the kitten to trust her. She could tell it was still scared of her, still wary of her movements and voice. It would look at her with wide eyes, tensing at the slightest sound. It was so small and fragile, and Anya could see how vulnerable it was. She knew that gaining the kitten's trust would take time. It wasn't going to happen overnight. She would need to be patient, calm, and consistent. Every time the kitten recoiled from her touch, she would have to reassure it that she meant no harm. Slowly, over time, she hoped that the kitten would begin to see her as a friend, not a threat. After the feeding session, Anya decided to create a more comfortable space for the kitten to rest. She wanted to make sure it felt safe and secure in the small room. She added a few more blankets to its bed and tucked them around the sides to make a cozy, enclosed area where the kitten could curl up without feeling exposed. She also placed a few toys nearby, soft balls of yarn and a small, stuffed mouse. She didn't know if the kitten would play with them, but she wanted to make sure it had some form of comfort and entertainment, even if just in the form of something familiar. As the kitten settled down into its new, snug corner, Anya sat down nearby, watching it closely. She kept her distance, not wanting to overwhelm it, but she felt a sense of accomplishment. She had taken the first steps, cleaning the wound, feeding the kitten, making it feel comfortable. But as the hours passed, the kitten's reluctance to eat and move around still weighed heavily on Anya's mind. Would it really recover? Was the care she was offering enough, or was she missing something critical? Her worries lingered, but one thing remained clear. She wasn't going to give up on this little creature. She would do whatever it took to help it heal. And so, with a mix of hope and anxiety, Anya settled in for another long day, watching over the kitten as it rested. Would it grow stronger? Would it learn to trust her more? Only time would tell, but Anya was ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 4. Fear and Distrust. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments of observation, each one brimming with hope and frustration in equal measure. Anya had made so much progress in caring for the kitten. She had cleaned its wounds, provided food and water, and created a safe, cozy space for it to rest. But there was one thing that eluded her: trust. Despite her best efforts, the kitten remained fearful of her, its wide eyes following every movement she made. Whenever she would approach, it would stiffen, its body tense and ready to flee. Every time she reached out a hand, it would dart to the farthest corner of the room, its tiny body trembling with anxiety. Anya understood that it was scared. It had been through so much, but it hurt her to see the little creature so terrified of her. She spent hours sitting beside the kitten, talking softly to it, hoping her calm voice would make a difference. But the kitten would just curl up into a tight ball, its body rigid with fear. Each time she tried to coax it into her lap or reach for it, it would hiss and scramble away. Anya sighed deeply as she watched the kitten from her seat on the floor. She had been sitting there for nearly an hour, hoping for some sign of progress. But the kitten didn't move. It simply stared at her, its big, amber eyes reflecting a mixture of distrust and confusion. "Why won't you let me help you?" she whispered, her voice tinged with sadness. "I promise I won't hurt you." But the kitten only blinked slowly, as if weighing whether she was telling the truth. Then, as if to reinforce its fear, it scurried further away, seeking refuge behind a stack of blankets. Anya knew she couldn't force the kitten to trust her. All she could do was wait and be patient. It wasn't going to be easy. She had read about how animals, especially those who had been abandoned or hurt, often needed time to heal, not just physically but emotionally. The kitten had been through something terrifying, and its instinct was to protect itself. So Anya did what she could. She waited. She would visit the kitten several times a day, sitting quietly beside it and offering words of comfort, even though she knew it couldn't understand them. She made sure it always had fresh food and water, cleaned its wounds, and kept its space tidy and warm. But still, the kitten refused to come closer. Several days passed, and while the kitten's physical condition improved, it was no longer trembling from the cold and had gained some weight. Its fear of Anya remained unchanged. One afternoon, after school, Anya sat at her desk, sketching in her notebook. The quiet house seemed peaceful, but her mind was preoccupied with the kitten. Her thoughts wandered back to it as she worked, wondering if she was doing enough. She hadn't made much progress with the kitten's fear, and that was the hardest part. But she was determined not to give up. That's when she got a call from her best friend, Moshe. Anya hadn't shared much with her about the kitten yet, but Moshe had been persistent, asking what she had been doing in the afternoons. Anya had simply told her that she was helping an animal, but now felt it was time to share the full story. "Hey, Anya. What's up? Still taking care of that little furball?" Moshe asked cheerfully over the phone. Anya smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Yeah, it's been tough. I'm doing everything I can, but the kitten is so scared. It won't let me touch it." Every time I try to get closer, it runs away. Poor thing. Moshe's voice softened with sympathy. But you're doing a good job, Anya. I'm sure it'll come around. Animals are just... I don't know, they're scared sometimes, you know? I know, Anya replied, her voice heavy. But it's frustrating. I'm doing everything right. Cleaning its wounds, feeding it, keeping it comfortable. But I don't know how to make it trust me. There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if Moshe was thinking carefully. Then she spoke up, her voice full of encouragement. Have you tried just sitting with it, like not even trying to touch it, but just being there? Maybe it just needs to get used to your presence first. Anya bit her lip, considering her friend's suggestion. I've been sitting next to it a lot, but maybe I've been trying too hard. Maybe I just need to let it come to me on its own. Exactly. You're doing great, Anya. Just keep being there for it, and it'll trust you eventually. You've got this. Moshe's words were simple, but they gave Anya a renewed sense of determination. After the phone call, Anya felt a bit lighter. Moshe was right. She had been focusing so much on trying to make the kitten trust her that she hadn't allowed it the space to approach her on its own terms. She needed to be patient, to let the kitten come to her when it was ready. That evening, after dinner, Anya decided to try a different approach. Instead of rushing in to clean the kitten's wound or coaxing it into her lap, she simply sat cross-legged on the floor, a few feet away from the bed where the kitten lay. She didn't try to talk to it or even look at it directly. She just sat quietly, her back against the wall, her hands resting on her knees. She was there, but not demanding anything from the kitten. Minutes passed, then an hour. The room was filled with silence except for the occasional soft mew from the kitten. Anya tried not to focus on the time. She didn't want to push the kitten. She just wanted to be there for it. As the night grew darker, Anya felt the warmth of the room settle around her, and the air grew still. Just as she was beginning to think that this approach wasn't working either, she saw the kitten shift. It crept forward slowly, its little paws making soft, tentative steps toward her. Anya held her breath as the kitten came closer, its ears flicking nervously, but it didn't retreat. It stopped just a few feet away from her, its wide eyes watching her cautiously. Anya's heart raced as she slowly extended her hand, palm open and fingers relaxed. She stayed still, letting the kitten decide whether it was ready to trust her. The kitten hesitated for a long moment, its tiny body trembling, but finally, it took a cautious step forward. Anya's breath caught in her throat as the kitten nuzzled her hand, a soft, tentative touch. She smiled softly, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "Good job, little one," she whispered. "I knew you could do it." In that moment, Anya knew they had taken a huge step forward. It wasn't much, but it was progress. She hadn't forced the kitten into anything. It had come to her on its own terms. It was the first sign of trust, and that made all the difference. As she gently stroked the kitten's fur for the first time, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The road ahead would still be difficult. There was so much more to do, so much more healing to come, but this was a victory. A small, but important victory. And it was a reminder that with time, patience, and love, even the deepest fears could be overcome. Chapter 5. The Battle with Illness. It had been a week since Anya had first found the kitten, and while it had made progress in some ways, gaining a little weight, slowly accepting her presence, there was a growing sense of unease that gnawed at Anya's heart. The kitten still wasn't playing or moving much, spending most of its time curled up in its bed. It would eat, but only in small amounts. The once vibrant spark in its eyes seemed to flicker dimly, and the little creature began to appear weaker with each passing day. That morning, Anya noticed something that made her stomach drop. The kitten was burning up. Its small body, once cold and stiff from fear, now felt uncomfortably warm to the touch. She knew she had to act fast, but she didn't know what to do. She had been giving the kitten food and water, keeping its wounds clean, and offering it comfort, but this felt like something she couldn't handle on her own. Her heart pounded as she gently picked up the kitten, cradling it in her arms. It let out a weak mew, its breathing shallow. The temperature of its small body had risen even more, and Anya felt a wave of panic flood her chest. "Please no," she whispered desperately. "You can't be getting worse. Please don't go." She rushed to the living room, where her phone was charging, and dialed the number of the local vet. Her fingers trembled as she waited for the line to connect, her mind racing with worry. The soft meows of the kitten in her arms only made her panic more. Finally, the receptionist answered. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "Hi, my kitten is really sick. It's burning up with fever. What should I do?" Anya's voice shook with the intensity of her fear. The receptionist took a calming breath. "I understand, sweetie. Don't panic. It sounds like your kitten might have an infection. The best thing to do right now is to bring it in for an evaluation. I'll make an appointment for you right away." "Thank you," Anya said quickly, relief washing over her for just a moment. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a professional who could help her. But as she waited for the appointment, her anxiety only grew. She wasn't sure how much time the kitten had. What if it didn't make it? What if the illness was too much for such a small, fragile creature to handle? At the vet's office, Anya sat nervously in the waiting area, her eyes glued to the small carrier in front of her. She had gently placed the kitten inside, wrapping it in a soft blanket to keep it warm. But her mind was far from calm. She kept checking on the kitten, rubbing its tiny paws, trying to comfort it. It looked so small and vulnerable in the cage, and Anya couldn't stop the worry from flooding her chest. When the vet finally called her name, Anya stood up shakily, gripping the carrier with both hands as she followed the technician into the examination room. The vet, a kind woman with short gray hair and soft eyes, greeted Anya and knelt down to examine the kitten. "We'll take good care of him," the vet said soothingly, before gently lifting the kitten out of the carrier and placing it on the examination table. She ran a thermometer under the kitten's arm, and after a long moment, she frowned. "It's definitely a fever," she said, her voice serious but calm. "It could be a bacterial infection, but we'll need to do some tests to figure out the exact cause. In the meantime, I'll give him an injection to lower the fever and help with the pain." Anya watched helplessly as the vet worked. She wanted to be strong for the kitten, but seeing it lying there, weak and helpless, tore at her heart. She felt so powerless, like all the love and care she had given him wasn't enough. What if it still wasn't enough? When the vet was finished, she turned to Anya with a reassuring smile. "The fever should come down soon. We'll keep him overnight for observation, but don't worry too much. Kittens are resilient. We'll do everything we can to help him recover." Anya nodded, her breath shaky. "Thank you. Please, just don't let him suffer." "We won't," the vet said kindly. "We'll take good care of him. You've done a wonderful job so far, but we can help him a little more now. Go home and rest, and we'll call you with an update." Anya felt a mixture of relief and fear. The kitten was in good hands now, but she still couldn't shake the worry that clung to her. Would he get better? Would he survive the night? That evening, as Anya lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the kitten. The thought of it alone, sick and vulnerable at the vet's office, broke her heart. She replayed the events of the day over and over in her mind. How she had found the kitten, how she had nurtured it, and how it had started to trust her. And now, after everything they had been through, it was fighting for its life. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly, trying to push the fear aside. She had to stay hopeful. The vet had said the kitten was resilient. It had survived the streets, the attack by the dogs, and now it had the chance to heal. But the anxiety was still there, gnawing at her. Around midnight, Anya received the phone call she had been waiting for. She jumped out of bed and answered it immediately. "Hello," she asked, her voice tight with fear. "Anya? This is Dr. Elena from the clinic. I wanted to give you an update on your kitten." Anya held her breath, her heart pounding. The good news is, his fever has started to drop. He's still weak, but he's responding well to the medication. We'll keep him here tonight for observation, but he's stable. It looks like he's going to pull through. Anya let out a long breath, her whole body sagging with relief. She felt the weight of her worry begin to lift. Just a little. The kitten was going to make it. It wasn't out of the woods yet, but the worst seemed to be over. Thank you, Anya whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Get some rest now, and we'll update you again in the morning. When she hung up the phone, Anya lay back down in her bed, tears of relief filling her eyes. She had done everything she could, and now it seemed like the kitten would survive. But just as she was starting to drift off to sleep, she remembered something. The kitten hadn't fully healed yet. There was still so much to be done. And as the night passed, so did another fear. What if the worst wasn't over yet? Would the kitten truly recover? Or would another setback leave them both in even more danger? The battle wasn't over, and Anya knew it would take all her strength to see it through. Chapter 6. The difficulties of treatment. The weeks following the kitten's battle with fever were filled with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Anya had been told that the worst was over, but the road to full recovery was still long and challenging. While the kitten's fever had subsided, it was still weak and fragile, and its wounds needed constant care. It would take more than just medication and food. It needed patience, time, and a great deal of attention. The first challenge Anya faced was the difficulty of getting the right medication. When the vet had prescribed antibiotics to fight off any lingering infection, Anya had assumed it would be a simple matter of picking up the medicine. But when she arrived at the local pharmacy, she quickly realized that finding the correct prescription for the kitten was anything but easy. "I'm sorry, dear," the pharmacist had said when Anya handed over the prescription. "We don't carry this particular antibiotic here for animals. You'll have to try a veterinary supply store or see your vet again." Anya had thanked the pharmacist and left the store, her heart sinking. She didn't want to waste any time. The kitten needed the medicine now. She felt the weight of the situation bearing down on her. But there was no time for despair. She couldn't give up now, not when they had come so far. She took out her phone and called the vet's office. When she explained the situation, the vet had been understanding but firm. "I'll call in the prescription to a supply store for you," she said. "It should be ready by tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing, and don't worry. He's making progress." Anya sighed with relief, but it was short-lived. The next challenge came when it was time to clean the kitten's wounds again. Though the infection had mostly healed, the kitten's little body still bore the signs of its painful past. Anya had been cleaning the wounds daily, making sure they were fresh and free of infection, but the process was never easy. This time, when she approached the kitten with a clean cloth and antiseptic, it let out a frightened mewl and scrambled to the corner of its bed. The little creature had been improving, but it had never fully lost its fear of her. Each time she tried to hold it still for cleaning, it would flinch away in terror. It's okay," Anya whispered, her voice trembling with frustration and empathy. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help you heal." But the kitten was still too scared. It tried to scramble away, its tiny body trembling under her hands. Anya hesitated, unsure whether she should push through, but she knew the wounds had to be cleaned. She gently held the kitten, trying not to hurt it, but it was so small and fragile. Each movement made it more frightened, and Anya's heart broke. She sat back for a moment, running a hand through her hair, feeling utterly defeated. Why was this so hard? It was supposed to get easier with time. But the kitten's fear, combined with its delicate health, made everything feel like an uphill battle. That evening, feeling drained and defeated, Anya decided to take a break. She left the kitten resting in its bed and walked into the kitchen, where her grandmother, Babushka, was making dinner. Her grandmother had always been a calm presence in her life, and Anya felt the need to talk to her about everything that had been happening. "Babushka, I don't know if I can do this," Anya said quietly, sinking into a chair. "The kitten's not getting any better. I just keep making things worse. It doesn't trust me, and I don't know how to make it feel better. I don't think I can fix it anymore." Babushka looked at her with kind, knowing eyes, wiping her hands on her apron before sitting down across from Anya. "My dear," Babushka said softly, her voice full of warmth and understanding. "Sometimes the hardest part is not the care we give, but the time we give. Healing takes patience. It's not always fast, And it's not always easy. You've been doing everything you can. And that's enough. But what if it's not? Anya asked, her voice shaky. What if it's too late? What if the kitten doesn't make it? Then you'll know that you gave everything you had, Babushka replied, her voice steady. And that, my dear, is all anyone can do. You're showing love and patience, and that is the most important thing. The kitten will feel that, even if it takes time. You can't rush healing. Anya felt the weight on her chest lighten a little. She had been so focused on the end result that she had forgotten to appreciate how far they had already come. The kitten was alive, it was healing. Just slowly. It wasn't easy, but it was something. Babushka's words were a balm to her wounded heart. After the conversation with Babushka, Anya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would keep going, even if it seemed like the road ahead was long. She would keep fighting for the kitten, just as she had from the very beginning. The next morning, when Anya went to check on the kitten, she was surprised to see something she hadn't expected. The kitten was sitting up, looking at her with those familiar, curious eyes. For a moment, Anya froze. She hadn't seen it sit up like this in days. It was a small sign, but it was a sign nonetheless. "Good morning," Anya whispered, kneeling down beside the bed. The kitten blinked slowly, then, to her astonishment, it took a small step toward her. Its tiny nose nudged her hand gently. Anya gasped, feeling her heart leap in her chest. It was the first time the kitten had shown any sign of affection. It wasn't much, just a soft, hesitant touch, but it meant the world to Anya. Her heart swelled with love as she carefully stroked the kitten's soft fur. The little creature seemed to relax under her touch, purring softly, its eyes closing in contentment. Anya couldn't believe it. After everything, the fear, the struggle, this simple, tender moment felt like a victory. It was a sign that the kitten was starting to trust her again. Anya smiled through her tears, whispering, "I knew you could do it." It wasn't the end of the journey, not by a long shot, but it was a turning point. The kitten was slowly, cautiously, but surely learning to trust again. And for Anya, that was the first real sign that all the struggles, all the pain, and all the love she had poured into this tiny creature were not in vain. The battle was far from over, but it felt like they had won their first, most important victory. Chapter 7. Problems with others. As the days passed, Anya found herself more and more isolated in her efforts to help the kitten recover. While the animal was showing signs of progress, the reality of the situation began to weigh heavily on her, and on those around her. The kitten still couldn't go outside, its wounds were still healing, and though its energy was returning, it was clear that the road to full recovery would be a long one. For Anya, this meant that she had to give up her usual activities. No more going to the park, no more playing with her friends in the afternoons. She spent nearly every moment with the kitten, making sure it had everything it needed. It was a responsibility she was willing to take on, but the constant care required to nurse the kitten back to health was exhausting. And with the weather warming up, Anya couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration when she saw her friends outside, enjoying the sunshine while she was stuck at home. One afternoon, she stood at her window, watching her friends run around outside, laughing and playing. They were having fun, while she was tethered to the house, nursing a tiny, fragile creature. "Don't you wish you could go outside and play with us?" One of her friends, Yulia, called up to her from the street. She waved her arms and smiled brightly. "It's a perfect day for a game of tag." Anya smiled back, but the weight in her chest made her words come out more quietly than she intended. "I can't. I'm looking after the kitten. It still needs a lot of care." Yulia's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded in understanding. "Okay, but we'll miss you." "Thanks," Anya said, forcing a cheerful tone. "I'll be okay." But as she watched them run off, the loneliness settled in deeper. She longed to join them, to forget about the responsibility for a moment and just be a regular kid. But the kitten needed her, and so she stayed. As the days passed, the situation grew more difficult. The kitten's protective instincts were beginning to surface, and it started to react aggressively whenever Anya approached its wounds or tried to pick it up. It would hiss and snap at her, its small teeth sinking into her hands when she least expected it. It wasn't the kitten's fault. It was in pain, and its reactions were simply a defense mechanism. But each time it bit her, Anya felt a surge of frustration. She knew the kitten wasn't trying to hurt her on purpose, but each attack chipped away at her confidence. She was beginning to question if she was doing the right thing. One evening, after the kitten had lashed out again, Anya sat on her bed, holding her sore wrist and staring at the small creature in frustration. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, not expecting an answer. "I'm trying to help you." But the kitten only looked up at her with wary eyes, and Anya felt an ache in her heart. She knew she needed to be patient, but it wasn't easy. The stress was beginning to show in other areas of her life, too. At school, Anya found it hard to focus on her homework. She kept thinking about the kitten, wondering if it was in pain, or whether it had eaten, or if its wounds were healing. She was constantly checking her phone for updates from the vet or making sure she had everything the kitten needed. Her friends noticed the change. Yulia, who had been one of her closest friends, approached her after class one day, her brow furrowed in concern. "Anya, is everything okay?" she asked gently, the concern in her eyes clear. "You've been kind of distant lately. You hardly talk to us anymore." Anya hesitated, her fingers gripping the strap of her backpack. She didn't want to admit how overwhelmed she was, but the pressure of everything was starting to get to her. She had never wanted to appear weak, but now it felt like all her responsibilities were catching up to her at once. "I'm just busy with the kitten," Anya said quietly, feeling a tight knot form in her throat. "It's a lot to take care of." "I get that," Yulia said, her tone soft. "But you've been taking care of it for so long. Maybe you need a break? You can't do everything on your own, you know." Anya flinched at the words. She didn't want to hear that she couldn't handle it. She didn't want to hear that she was failing the kitten. "I'll be fine," she replied, her voice a little sharper than she intended. "I just need to keep going." But Yulia looked unconvinced, and Anya couldn't shake the feeling that her friends were starting to doubt her ability to handle the situation. Was she really capable of managing all of this? Was she truly doing the right thing? That evening, Anya sat down to dinner, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her. Her mother, noticing how tired her daughter looked, asked gently, "Anya, sweetie, are you sure you're okay? You've been so quiet lately." Anya hesitated before answering. "I'm just tired, Mom." But her mother wasn't convinced. "I know you're doing a lot for that kitten, but you need to take care of yourself too. It's taking up all your time. You've been spending every day with it. Aren't you worried that you're losing out on other things?" Anya's heart sank. "I'm not losing out on anything," she protested, but she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. "I just want to help." Her mother gave her a long, searching look before replying. "You're doing your best, Anya, but sometimes it's okay to admit when things are too much. We want you to be happy. Don't let this responsibility weigh you down." The words stung, but they also made Anya pause. Was it possible that she was pushing herself too hard? Was she so focused on saving the kitten that she had forgotten about everything else? As the days went on, Anya faced a hard truth. She was torn between her love for the kitten and her growing concerns about her own well-being. Was she strong enough to keep going? Was she sacrificing too much? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain: she wasn't ready to give up. She knew she couldn't walk away now, not when the kitten needed her more than ever. So despite the doubts swirling around her, from her friends, from her mom, even from her own heart, Anya made a decision. She would keep going, no matter how hard it got. The road was difficult, and the future was uncertain, but she would never give up on the kitten. She couldn't. And as she looked down at the little creature, still uncertain and scared but healing in its own way, she realized that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones worth fighting. Chapter 8. A turning point. It had been weeks since Anya had found the kitten, and slowly, but surely, it seemed to be turning a corner. What had once been a fragile, trembling little creature, scared of the world and of her, was beginning to show signs of improvement. The wounds were healing, its fur was growing back, and, most importantly, It was starting to show its true nature once again. Anya couldn't help but feel a spark of hope when, one morning, the kitten seemed more energetic than usual. It started with small movements. At first, the kitten only stretched a little, its small paws reaching out, its body stiff with the effort. But the next day, it began to explore its bed more actively, moving around with curiosity. Anya stood in the doorway, watching in awe as the kitten sniffed at the toys she had set up beside its bed. It seemed to be testing its limits, pushing itself further than it had in days. "You're getting stronger," Anya whispered to herself, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I knew you could do it." The breakthrough came later that afternoon. Anya had left the kitten resting in its little corner while she went to do some homework. When she returned to check on it, she gasped in surprise. The kitten, who had only ever sat or lay curled up in its bed, was standing. It wasn't quite a graceful movement. The kitten was a little wobbly on its feet, its legs trembling with the effort, but it was standing. For a moment, it simply looked up at Anya, as if it had no idea what to do next. Then, with a hesitant step, it took its first shaky move across the floor, its small paws clicking against the hardwood. Anya couldn't believe it. She rushed over, kneeling beside the kitten, her heart beating fast. "Look at you," she exclaimed softly, her voice filled with awe. "You're walking." The kitten, still unsteady, stopped and looked up at her, its wide eyes full of wonder and uncertainty. It hesitated for a moment, as though unsure if it was safe to trust Anya's excitement. But then, slowly, it took another tentative step. Anya held her breath, watching as the kitten moved a little further across the room. For the first time in weeks, the kitten's movements were no longer confined to its bed. It was exploring, and Anya couldn't stop the tears that welled up in her eyes. The road ahead was still long, but this was a sign that the kitten was finally starting to regain its confidence. In the days that followed, the kitten's progress continued to surprise her. It began to act more like a kitten should, pouncing on toys, chasing after strings, even climbing up onto the windowsill to watch the birds outside. It was as if all the strength it had been conserving was finally being released in bursts of energy. But it wasn't just physical recovery. The kitten was starting to trust Anya more. The tentative nudges it had once given her hand had become more confident. It would approach her, purring softly as she sat down to feed it. It even allowed her to pet it without flinching away. Anya couldn't believe how far they had come together. The kitten, once so fearful of human touch, was now rubbing against her legs and curling up on her lap, seeking affection. Each small step felt like a victory, and Anya relished every moment of it. She had grown so close to the kitten, and now it felt like the bond they shared was growing stronger with each passing day. The real turning point came when the kitten started eating and drinking with an appetite. For weeks, it had been cautious, nibbling at food and taking only small sips of water. But now, it was devouring its meals with gusto, eagerly lapping up the milk and tearing into the soft food Anya had prepared for it. She couldn't help but laugh with joy as she watched it eat. The transformation was incredible. "You're a little fighter, aren't you?" Anya said, stroking the kitten's head as it licked its dish clean. It looked up at her, blinking in contentment, and Anya felt her heart swell. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, something unexpected happened. One morning, Anya woke up to find that the kitten was gone. She had left it sleeping in its bed the night before, as always, but now there was no sign of it. The bed was empty, the soft blankets rumpled and undisturbed. Anya's first thought was that the kitten had simply wandered to another part of the house, perhaps to explore. She quickly checked the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway, but there was no sign of it anywhere. Panic began to rise in her chest. "Kitty," she called softly, her voice trembling. "Where are you?" She checked the window, wondering if the kitten had somehow managed to slip out through the cracked open window. But the screen was intact, and the window was too high for the small creature to escape through. Her heart began to race. Could the kitten have run outside? But she had kept the door locked, and the window was the only way out. It didn't make sense. Anya searched every corner of the house. She checked under the couch, behind the curtains, in every closet. She called out its name, her voice growing more frantic with each passing moment. She even checked the backyard, calling for it in the yard, searching around the garden and under the bushes. There was no trace of the kitten anywhere. A knot formed in Anya's stomach. How could it have disappeared so suddenly? The kitten had never tried to leave the safety of the house before. It had been so weak, so fragile. Now, just when it seemed to be recovering, it had vanished. Anya's mind raced. Had something happened to it? Did it wander off and get into trouble? Or, her heart sank. Had someone taken it? The questions swirled in her mind, and the fear settled deep in her chest. She couldn't lose the kitten now, not after everything they had been through together. Determined not to give up, Anya resolved to find the kitten, no matter what. But the question remained, where could it have gone? Chapter 9. An unexpected return. Anya's heart pounded in her chest as she scoured the neighborhood. It had been hours since she first realized the kitten was missing, and the panic hadn't eased. She had asked everyone she knew, knocking on doors and searching every corner of the yard. Her thoughts raced. Could it have wandered off? Could someone have taken it? Had it gotten hurt again? She first checked her neighbors' houses, hoping that maybe someone had seen the kitten or taken it in. She knocked on Mrs. Ivanova's door, her hands trembling. "Have you seen my kitten? He's small, gray, and white," she trailed off, her voice shaking with fear. Mrs. Ivanova opened the door with a concerned look on her face. "No, Anya. I haven't seen him around today. But you should check near the old shed by the park. Sometimes the cats go there." "Thank you," Anya called back, rushing down the path to the park. She didn't waste time looking around the yard, heading straight for the old shed. Her legs ached, but she couldn't stop. The kitten could be out there, hurt or frightened. She had to find it. As she approached the shed, she heard a faint meow, one that sounded familiar. It made her heart leap. Could it be the kitten? She hurried toward the sound, her breath quickening. The meows grew louder until, at the corner of the shed, she saw a small, familiar gray and white figure. But the kitten wasn't alone. A second, larger cat stood beside it, a scruffy-looking creature with matted fur. The kitten was sitting calmly next to the older cat, rubbing its head against its companion's side. Anya froze in surprise, watching in disbelief as the kitten seemed perfectly content, nestled against the older cat. Her first instinct was to rush forward and scoop up her little friend, but as she took a step closer, the larger cat hissed, warning her to keep her distance. "Kitty," Anya called softly, but the kitten didn't move. It looked up at her, recognizing her voice, but instead of running to her arms as it once would have, it just stayed where it was. She took another cautious step forward, but as she did, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. The kitten's fur was dirty and tangled. It looked like it had been outside for a while, perhaps even fighting. And when she leaned in closer, her heart sank as she saw faint scratches along its back and sides, old wounds that hadn't been there before. "Oh no," Anya whispered, her stomach turning. "What happened to you?" The older cat stood guard, its sharp eyes watching Anya intently, as if it was protecting the kitten from her. But the kitten itself didn't seem afraid. It simply gazed at her, its eyes wide but calm. It seemed different, almost distant. A wave of fear swept over Anya. What if the kitten had been hurt again? What if it was sick? She needed to get it home and take care of it right away. Tentatively, she stepped forward again, this time reaching out her hand toward the kitten. But before she could make contact, the older cat lunged forward, blocking her path. Anya recoiled, her pulse quickening. It was clear that this new cat wasn't going to let her take the kitten without a fight. "Hey!" Anya called out, her voice sharp. "I just want to help him." But the older cat didn't back down. Instead, it let out a low growl, warning her to stay away. Anya's mind raced. She could see that the kitten was still weak from its injuries, and it hadn't healed completely. But why had it gone with this strange cat? Was it in danger again? "I have to take you home," Anya whispered to the kitten, her voice full of urgency. "Please, let me help." The kitten looked up at her once more. This time, something seemed to shift in its gaze. The trust it once had for her was still there, buried beneath the surface, but it was hesitant. It looked from the older cat to Anya and then back again. After what felt like an eternity, the kitten slowly stood up, taking a few tentative steps toward her. The older cat followed closely behind, its eyes never leaving Anya. She held her breath as the kitten made its way to her. And finally, with a soft meow, it reached her and nudged its head into her hand. Anya sighed in relief, rubbing the kitten's soft fur gently. "Thank you," she whispered, as the kitten allowed her to pet it once again. Anya carefully picked up the kitten, holding it close to her chest. She turned to leave, but the older cat watched them as they walked away, never taking its eyes off the two of them. "I'll take care of him," Anya said softly, more to herself than to the older cat. "Don't worry." When Anya got home, she immediately set to work cleaning the kitten's wounds. As she carefully bathed the little creature, she noticed how the scratches and scrapes on its body were healing slowly but surely. But there was something else, something that unsettled her. The kitten's eyes seemed distant, as if it was torn between two worlds. Once the kitten was settled in its bed again, Anya sat beside it, stroking its fur. The warmth of the room, the soft light filtering through the window, seemed to comfort them both. But there was still a lingering worry in Anya's heart. What had happened while the kitten was away? And why had it gone with that strange cat? As she thought about it, she realized something important. She had been so focused on saving the kitten on her own, trying to do everything by herself, that she hadn't considered the possibility of help. She hadn't thought about the possibility that the older cat, despite its wild nature, might have been looking out for the kitten, guiding it and watching over it. It wasn't just her responsibility to save the kitten. Maybe it was okay to accept help from others, even if it came in unexpected forms. The lesson, though hard to admit, was clear. No one, not even Anya, could do everything alone. It was okay to rely on others. In fact, it was sometimes necessary. With the kitten purring softly in her lap, Anya made a vow to herself. She would continue to protect and care for her little friend, but she would also be open to the help and support that came her way. After all, even the strongest bonds could be made stronger when shared. And as she sat there, her arms around the kitten, Anya knew one thing for sure: she would never let go. Not now, not ever. Chapter 10. A happy ending. It had been several weeks since the kitten's unexpected return, and Anya couldn't help but marvel at the incredible transformation she had witnessed. The small creature that had once been so fragile and terrified was now a healthy, energetic kitten, full of life and curiosity. Its fur had grown back, soft and shiny, and its wounds had completely healed. The once timid kitten now approached her eagerly, rubbing its face against her hand and purring contentedly. The days of concern and fear were behind them. The kitten had found its strength, and so had Anya. She had given everything she had to help it, and now she could see the fruits of her hard work. The bond between them had deepened in ways she never could have imagined. They were inseparable. Wherever Anya went, the kitten was never far behind, following her like a shadow, jumping into her lap when she sat down, curling up beside her when she slept. It wasn't just Anya who noticed the change. Her parents, too, had been watching with admiration as she took on the responsibility of caring for the kitten. At first, they had been skeptical, worried about the risks and the work involved, but now they couldn't help but be proud of their daughter. They saw how much she had grown through this experience, how her compassion and determination had brought about a miracle. "You've done something amazing, Anya," her mom said one evening, as they all sat around the dinner table. "We're so proud of you. The way you cared for that kitten. It's incredible." Anya smiled shyly, but her heart swelled with warmth. "I couldn't have done it without you both," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "You were right there, supporting me when things got tough." Her dad nodded, his expression one of quiet pride. "You taught us all something, Anya. About patience, and about never giving up on someone, or something, you care about." Anya looked down at the kitten, who was now nestled comfortably on her lap, purring as she stroked its soft fur. She could hardly believe how far they had come. It was hard to remember the scared, injured little creature she had first found on that fateful day. But now, the kitten had found its place in their home, and in Anya's heart. It was hers now, completely, her constant companion, her little friend. She had always dreamed of having a pet, but this was more than just a pet. This was a miracle, a testament to the power of love and care. The moment of realization came one sunny afternoon, when Anya was sitting on the porch, the kitten curled up beside her, basking in the warmth of the sun. It was a peaceful moment, and as she watched the world go by, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The journey had been long, full of challenges, but it had also been full of small victories. The times when the kitten had finally trusted her enough to let her hold it. The moments when she had cleaned its wounds, patiently comforting it through the pain. The times when it had curled up in her lap, its body warm and content, purring as if to say, "Thank you for saving me." Anya knew that this was the real lesson. It wasn't just about saving an animal. It wasn't even about proving that she could do it. It was about the journey, the lessons learned along the way, the patience and the empathy, and the way a heart full of care could make a difference in the world. The kitten had found its way to her, and she had found her way to it. They had healed together, each teaching the other something important. And now it was clear, the kitten belonged here, with her, in her home, and in her heart. As Anya sat there, watching the kitten chase a butterfly in the garden, she realized that the real magic lay not in the miracle of the kitten's recovery, but in the love that had created it. She looked at her parents, and they smiled back at her, proud of the young woman she had become. "Mom, Dad," Anya said quietly, "I know I can do anything now. I know that as long as I have love and patience, I can make a difference. It's not just about fixing things. It's about being there, no matter what." Her mom reached over and gave her a gentle hug. "You've learned something we all need to remember, Anya. Love really can make the world a better place." The kitten returned to Anya's side, nuzzling against her leg. It looked up at her, its eyes full of trust and affection. And in that moment, Anya knew that this was just the beginning of many more adventures together. Because sometimes, the greatest miracles aren't the ones that happen overnight. They're the ones that are built, day by day, with love, care, and an unwavering belief that anything is possible when you don't give up. With a smile on her face, Anya held the kitten close and whispered softly, "We did it, little one. We really did it." And as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the yard, Anya realized that this was the happiest ending she could have ever hoped for.